We begin today our second series of Old Testament Bible history. We studied 24 lessons on the history of the Hebrew family. It begins with creation, sinners in Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and Egypt, and finally deliverance from Egypt through Moses. And we come to finally the point that they're about to go back into the land of Abraham, the land promised in Genesis 15. It would be from the river of Egypt down south on the border between Egypt and Palestine to the great river, the river Euphrates, and from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River. We've seen them conquer more land than that, as they conquered Sihon of Gilead in the central campaign on the east side of the Jordan, and then Og of Bashan, then finally Balak of Moab, and they inherit then land that they'd not been promised. They conquer land that they'd not been promised. Now it's time to begin our study of the history of the Hebrew nation for 24 lessons, as we'll see them take the land under Joshua, ruled in a loose confederacy by the judges, and then ruled in a tight monarchy by the kings. We'll see their sin. We'll see them lose the land by covenant. The covenant we studied in Deuteronomy 28, 29, and 30. It said if they did God's will, they'd always be blessed and live in this land. But if they rebelled and served other gods, then they would lose their land and be in captivity. We'll see that happen in our study of the Hebrew nation. It was also promised, if they're in that captivity, they called God to mind and repented and began to obey Him according to the law, then they'd come back to the land and rebuild their temple. And that's where we'll close Old Testament history, the history of the Hebrew nation, as they're back in the land, living again in Abraham's land, the temple built, they're again worshiping God and having fellowship with Him. But let's begin our study with the study of the conquest of Canaan. 2 lessons, this one and the next one, will be from the book of Joshua. As Joshua, Moses' aide, Moses' right-hand man, leads them into promised land. Notice in chapter 1 that God has a charge to Joshua. And there are 3 things that He tells Joshua. Take the land, be courageous, and charge my people. Notice in verse 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, because he's dead, they cannot enter promised land until Moses died. For Moses had sinned concerning getting the water from the rock, and so God had said, you'll not enter promised land. So he climbed to the top of Pisgah, Mount Nebo, and looked across the Jordan and saw all the promised land and went to his reward. Moses is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give them to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the great sea on the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. Now watch His promise. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you, nor forsake you. So there's His first charge. Take the land. And the promise, I will be with you. I will go with you as you cross this river. You don't need to be afraid. As I was with Moses and delivered him from all his enemies, so I'll be with you and deliver you from all your enemies. That's the first charge, take the land. But Joshua, evidently, although a courageous man, didn't really actually fully believe that he was able to do that. So God had another charge for him. Be strong and be very courageous. Now, strong doesn't mean physical strength, because you can't command a person to be strong physically who's not already strong physically. This is talking about mental strength. Be strong in your mind. Be courageous in your heart, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their forefathers to give them, he says in verse 6. But evidently that was not enough yet, for verse 7 says, be strong and very courageous. This time he adds an adjective to courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Notice what it took to be successful. What it took for Joshua to inherit the land. It didn't take ability. It didn't take intelligence. It didn't take oratory. In a way, it took wisdom. He had to be wise enough to be strong mentally, courageous in his heart, and careful in his obedience. If he was strong, courageous, and careful, he would inherit the land. Verse 8 says, do not let this book of the law depart from your mouth. I would have thought he would have said heart, but he said mouth. So not only is Joshua to be strong and courageous and careful, but he is to teach others from the law, from the Word of God, from the book of God to be so. He says, meditate on it day and night so that you may be careful to do what is written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. God is really stressing to Joshua the heart that he needs to have, the life that he needs to live, and the word that he needs to speak. Look at verse 9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. God never gives a person a commandment to obey that he doesn't promise him the resources that's going to enable him to obey that commandment. God says, I want you strong, you courageous, you careful, you teaching, you obedient, and I will be with you. I will give you the power to do that. Beginning in verse 10, he says, then order your brothers. Tell everybody else to do what I've told you to do. Verse 10. So Joshua ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp and tell the people, get your supplies ready. 3 days from now, you'll cross the Jordan here to go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your own. So he simply repeats the word that God has given him and says, God has told me that we're able to do this. Now, 2.5 tribes have decided to live east of the Jordan. The Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh have decided that they're not going to inherit in promised land. That they like this land that they took from Sihon and from Og and from Moab. And they're going to live in that land. So God charges them, or God does through Joshua, in verse 12. He says, but to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the command that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you. The Lord your God is giving you rest and has granted you this land. Your wives, your children, your livestock may stay in the land that Moses gave you east of the Jordan. But all your fighting men, fully armed, must cross over ahead of the brothers. You are to help your brothers until the Lord gives them rest, as he has done for you, and until they too have taken possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving them. After that, you may go back and occupy your own land. He says you cannot inherit. You cannot actually have this land until all your brothers have inherited. Israel will live in tents until Israel occupies all of the promised land. They cannot rest until the covenant has been fulfilled. How are the people going to respond? Especially these people east of the Jordan who've already conquered their land, who are ready for their wives and children and flocks to settle down there. How are they going to react to the command to cross that Jordan and conquer the land that their brothers will live in? Well, let's look in chapter 1, verse 16. Then they answered Joshua, whatever you've commanded us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will fully obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your word and does not obey your words, whatever you may command them, will be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. Isn't it interesting that the people say to Joshua exactly what God had said to Joshua? Joshua told them what God had said, and the people charged Joshua with exactly what God had charged him. Only be strong and very courageous. I think these people are ready to enter promised land. They have another good leader. Moses is dead. But Joshua has the Spirit of the Lord upon him, as we studied in the last chapter of the book of Deuteronomy. And Joshua is an humble man that has to be encouraged for mental strength and spiritual heart and the heart to obey the Word of God. They're ready to take the promised land. But any wise general, any wise conqueror is going to spy out the land. He's going to know as much as he can about the land that he's about to take. And so Joshua sends 2 spies to Jericho. And he tells them, isn't it interesting, 2, not 12, as had been before, but 2. Joshua evidently chose 2 men he could trust. And he says, go over the land and spy out the land, especially spy out Jericho. That's the strong, fortified city just across Jordan. So they went and they entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. There's a lot of argument over this word prostitute. Let it mean whatever you want it to mean. It's thought by many it means innkeeper. It's thought by others it means sacred woman. So she might have been tied to the religion of that day, which would make her a prostitute. Or it may simply mean prostitute. Bad people are used by God in good ways and become good people. Whatever we think about this woman before this occasion, she becomes a woman of God on this occasion, and she will be in the lineage of Christ. The Messiah will come through the marriage of this lady to one of the Jews. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. How they found that out, we do not know. So the king of Jericho sent the message to Rahab, bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they've come to spy out the whole land. But the woman Rahab, has already taken the men and hidden them. So she replies to the king's messengers, yes, the men came to me, but I didn't know not where they'd come from. At dusk, when it was time, the men left. I don't know which way they've gone. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she laid out on the roof. Don't try to justify her lie. Her lie cannot be justified. But Hebrews 11 justifies this woman. For this is a woman of faith. We've already studied enough in the book of Genesis and Exodus for us to realize that men and women of God are not perfect, that they make mistakes and sin just like other people do. But Rahab is walking by faith. She now has faith in God and not faith in the gods that she'd known before. So the men pursue where she told them that the spies had gone. Before the spies had laid down for the night, she goes up to the roof and she says to these 2 men of God, I know who you are. I know that the Lord God has given this land to you. A great fear has already swept through this land because we've heard how the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea. We've heard what he did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites. When we heard that, our hearts melted and everybody's courage failed because of you. It is evident that the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. God's providential guidance of his people and his marvelous giving of them victory over all of their enemies has convinced not only this woman, but many people in the land that they are the power and not the king of Jericho or the king of any of the tribes or any of the cities in all of Palestine. Now here's the woman's plea in verse 12. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you'll show kindness to my family because I've shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the life of my father and my brother and my brothers and my sisters and all who belong to them, and that you'll not be put them to death. The spies say, our lives for your lives. You continue to help us. You give us peace and prosperity. You faithfully deal with us and deliver us from our enemies, and we'll remember you when we come back to destroy this city. She gave them good advice. Go to the hills and hide there 3 days until all the soldiers have quit searching for you, and then go on your way. The 2 men said, here's what we will do. As long as you stay in the house and do not go outside the house, when we come back to lay siege to this city, you will be saved. Only do this: hang a scarlet thread out the window. Interesting to me, it's a scarlet thread. There's a scarlet thread running throughout all of the Old Testament, and that's God, or Jesus, as he saves the people again and again and again. So Rahab and her whole house agree to that. The men leave and they go to the hills. They stay there 3 days. They go back and they tell Joshua all that they have seen in the land, particularly in the city of Jericho. And they say to Joshua, the Lord has surely given the whole land into our hand. All the people are melting in fear because of us. The last verse of chapter 2. So these two spies bring back a united word this time. Not only united in the condition of the land, but united in their faith that they believe they can take the land. And so Joshua and all of Israel will now cross the Jordan River and go into Promised Land. In chapter 3, verses 1 to 13, there's preparation for that crossing of the land. In verses 14 through 17, there's the crossing itself, and what a day it was. The priest marched with the Ark of the Covenant to the Jordan River, put their feet in the river. And as soon as they stepped into the river, the water quit flowing miles up the way. God put a wall, and all the water flowed into the Dead Sea. And Israel again crossed an impassable, because it is at flood tide at this time, an impassable object by the power, the miraculous power of God. The priests take the Ark of the Covenant and stand in the middle of the Jordan. And all of Israel passes by. One man of every tribe is chosen to carry a stone from the ground, from the other side of the Jordan, and lay it beside the priest to build an altar, and pick up a stone from the middle of the Jordan and carry it the other side of the Jordan and lay it down to build an altar there to commemorate the fact that God has brought them again safely through the impossible barrier. They are now with their feet in Promised Land. And the first thing they do is they pitch a new camp. They establish a new center of operation. It had been Shittim on the east side of the Jordan, and now it's Gilgal on the west side of the Jordan. And as soon as that camp is built, and as soon as they're in Promised Land, the manna ceases. All that in chapter 4, verses 19 and following. God makes a covenant with them. And that covenant is that this land will now sustain them. They'll eat from crops that they've not planted. They'll drink from vineyards they've not planted. They'll anoint themselves with oil from trees they've not planted. They'll live in houses they've not built, because they will possess all that this people possesses. They will possess Promised Land. That's the promise. Now Jericho is the first city that needs to be taken. And that's all the way over in chapter 6 of Joshua. They're all circumcised. A lot of things occur. They're all circumcised. They're near Jericho. Joshua determines that they're going to take the land. The angel of the Lord appears to him with a sword in his hand. But not as earlier, as in the case of Balaam, where he was there to kill him. But he's there to fight with him and to fight for him. And Joshua knows that the Lord now is his commander-in-chief, and that the angel of the Lord will go before him. God gives a very unusual battle plan for taking Jericho. He says, I want all the fighting, fully armed men. That's the inner 40,000 that fight beside Joshua. That's not the thousands of thousands, that's the whole army. But that's the crack troops. Those are the special ones of Joshua and of God. He said, I want them to march around the city one time every day. I want the priests there with their trumpets. I want all of it there, but I want them to march around in total silence one day. Then I want them to do it the second day. Then I want them to do it the third day. Then I want to do them the fourth day and the fifth day and the sixth day. For 6 days, these 40,000 men with the priest and the trumpets and all of the people watching marched around the city. I've tried to imagine what the people inside of Jericho were thinking. Were they frightened? Were they amused? Were they confused? They found out the seventh day. The seventh day they march around once, but it's different. They march around twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times. And the priests put the silver trumpets to their lips and blow the trumpet blast. And Joshua gives the signal. And all the people shout. And the wall crumbles. It doesn't fall. It crumbles. It goes to the ground like a building that has been dynamited. It just sinks all the way to the ground. And Joshua and his people enter the city of Jericho. They're told by God, this is a devoted city. Kill everybody, man, woman, and child. You don't take anything for yourself. All the gold and all the silver and all the clothes and everything else is to come into my treasury. This city, God says, and everybody in it and everything in it belongs to me. It is devoted unto God. And it seems as if they've done that, because it is a great victory. And Jericho is in ruins and has been burnt and is in ashes. But we find out in chapter 7, verse 1, that the Israelites acted unfaithfully. For Achan, one single man, for Achan took some of the devoted things. So the anger kindled against Israel. There's a blessing in being a nation. There's a blessing in being a body. But there's also some terrible tragedies involved in that too. For one Israelite sin involved the entire family of God. One man's wrong involved the whole nation. And God's anger burns against Israel because they've taken of the devoted thing. They go up to the city of Ai, just a small city. And the spy says, we don't need everybody to take this city, only a handful. So they send 3,000 men. But because the camp is not pure, the men of Ai chase those 3,000 men away and kill 36 of them. And when Joshua hears of that, he falls on his face and asks God, shouldn't we have stayed the other side of the Jordan? Now we're not going to be able to win anymore. God says, get up. Look into the camp. There's something wrong with the camp. Anytime the people of God are not winning their victory, there's something wrong in the camp. We need to cleanse the camp. They investigated. They took them tribe by tribe, and the tribe of Judah was taken, and family by family, and man by man, until finally Achan was chosen by Lot, and he stood there by himself, and Joshua says, give honor to God. What have you done? And Achan says in a very powerful verse, in verse 21, just verse 21 of chapter 7, he said, I saw a beautiful robe from Babylon, 200 shekels of silver, a wedge of gold weighing 50 shekels. I took them. They're hidden in my camp. I saw, I coveted, I took, I hid. That's the steps to sin. But they don't just take his word. They go and dig under his tent where it says they're hidden, and they find there, just as he said, the gold and the silver and the garment. So they took Achan. This is verse 24. Chapter 7. They took Achan, the silver, the robe, the gold. They took his sons and his daughters, his cattle, his donkeys and his sheep, his tent, and all that he had to the valley of Achor. And Joshua says, why have you brought this trouble upon us? That's what Achor means, trouble. The Lord will bring trouble to you. And they stoned him. And after they'd stoned the rest, they burned them. Over Achan they heaped up a pile of rocks, which remains to this day. Then the Lord turned from his fierce anger. Therefore the place has been called the Valley of Achor ever since. The next day they go out to war against Ai again. He sends 5,000 men, he leading them toward the city. The rest of the men are back behind the city. The men chase him out of the city. He runs. The men run after him. He turns and attacks them. They're caught in the pincer, and all Ai falls. And therefore the anger of the Lord turned away from Israel. When sin is in the camp, number one, it can exist and the leader not be aware of it. Number two, it always involves more than the sinner. 36 Israelites are dead and Israel's been defeated because Achan sinned. It causes the body not to be able to stand before its enemies. It needs to be made known to the whole congregation. It's a time for action and not just a time for prayer. It's caused by looking and coveting and taking and hating. And when purged, it brings God's blessings again. The people of God are back faithful to God. They will win. Some people come to see them. People of Gibeon, which is only 15, 20 miles away. But they're dressed in old clothes, and they're carrying cracked wine bottles and water bottles, and they have dust all over their animals. They claim to come from a long distance away. Joshua's already had one mistake because he didn't inquire of God. He does not inquire of God concerning these Gibeonites. So he makes a covenant with them that he will not harm them, and then finds out they're his neighbor. He's angry. The people of God are angry. What are they to do? He cannot break his word, so he makes them his slaves. He says they'll be drawers of water and hewers of wood. They'll cut his wood, they'll draw his water, they'll work for him as slaves all of the days of their life. But he will come to their defense in our next lesson. God uses these Gibeonites to stir up trouble and help Joshua conquer the land. In this first lesson, we've learned that God is only going to bless the people if the people will follow him. If there's sin in the camp, let's purge it today so that victory will occur tomorrow.